ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how.
Hey there, this is Matt Petrowski for ISO FileMaker Magazine. We're going to learn more about FileMaker. In this video, we're continuing with our Ultimate course, and we are learning about dates in this particular video. Let's head to my desktop, take a look at the file. All right, as you can see, both above me and over here, we've got the file that we are developing. It is our launcher file. The great thing about this file is that this also is going to serve as our repository of code for when we are building a solution. If we're always launching the launcher, we can simply just pull from that code and put it directly into the solutions we're working on. Now, in this particular video, as I bring up the Manage Custom Functions, this is what we're going to be going through. If you have not spent a lot of time working with dates, then there are a lot of little pieces or little nuances to know about working with dates and times and timestamps. Going down to the most atomic unit, which is going to be seconds, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's fractional seconds. Really depends on the systems that you're working with. Knowing how FileMaker stores dates and what are the most popular common formats for dates, we're going to be going through that in this particular video. You can see the functions that we have here. We've got a date ISO 8601. What are some of the standards? There you can see 8601 again. You can see some date validation, which we'll talk about. We've got some nice convenience functions, and we'll talk about those a little bit. But most importantly, what we're going to talk about is a core of how FileMaker's dates work, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. All right, so the first thing we need to cover is what do you store in your database, and how does FileMaker's dates and times differ from many other popular common formats? First off, let's talk about the most popular formats that you're going to come across when you're developing in FileMaker, or let's say the predominant formats that are used across the board in terms of technology. First off, of course, there is going to be FileMaker's own method of storing dates. Now, that is different than what a lot of the rest of the world works off of, which is going to be a Unix timestamp right there. Now, we can see that when we use FileMaker's getCurrentTimestamp, just the standard function that gets the current timestamp, we have to know that that is getting the timestamp of the user's local computer. Now, that isn't always what you need, which we're going to see when we take a look at the time zone offset and understand how that factors in. When it comes to computing and creating a system based on technology, then predominantly you're wanting to use something as a standard. And in all of computing, whether you're using Google's web services, Amazon's web services, creating your own, pretty much the standard is GMT, or Greenwich Mean Time. And that also can be referenced as UTC, or Universal, I always think of it as Universal Coordinated Time, but it's UTC, so it's maybe Universal Time Coordinated. I haven't looked it up. I just know that UTC and GMT pretty much mean roughly the same thing, but if you go look on Wikipedia, who knows? It may be different. Long story short, FileMaker displays this date and time that we have here on screen, but that is not how it's stored. Internally, if we wrap a getAsNumber around the getCurrentTimestamp, we can see that FileMaker is internally storing just a long number. Now, this is a little bit easier to store if you're going to be using JSON strictly for the purpose of you storing a date into your own JSON. Let's say you're saving it into a field. Saving this number and using the JSON number constant may be a little bit better or easier than actually storing this timestamp, because this timestamp, when you store it in JSON, is actually stored as text, and then you have to convert that using the getAsTimestamp function. Now, FileMaker has two different functions we're looking at. The getCurrentTimestamp, you're probably familiar with. The getCurrentHostTimestamp. This brings up an important topic of time is always relative. No matter what you're going to store, something has to be absolute. And I would argue that in your FileMaker system, the best choice to make as an absolute is to use the same thing that the rest of the technology world uses out there, which is GMT or UTC. So when I open this database, the managed database, we go into the tables and go into one of the default tables. And I mentioned that when I create a new table in my FileMaker solution, there are default fields. And by and large, all of them include a created on and created by, modified on and modified by. Now, by default, when we look at the created on, it's set to a timestamp. And we look at this. This is a byproduct of what comes with FileMaker that's really easy. You just check this box and then you select right here and you can say timestamp, date and time. The problem is FileMaker is only ever using the get current timestamp. It's using the user's local time. Now that's really no problem if you're going to have a FileMaker system and it's all within the same time zone. But I would argue that in today's day and age, where we're working with APIs, disconnected systems, AI, and everything's reaching out and touching a bunch of different things, you probably do want the created on, but you don't really need those two fields, which are default behavior for a lot of FileMaker developers. Instead, you want these two most importantly, the created UTC and the modified UTC. Now, from these values, you can always get whatever the user's local time is. So this would just be another savings. I wouldn't necessarily need these two fields. Now, what I do is I actually, just out of habit, leave those in as my default fields, and then I add these in right here. Now you can see that because when we look at the auto enter for this, we're not using FileMaker's little convenience options here of the creation or the modifications, because FileMaker is using that get current timestamp or the local timestamp. Instead, by using a calculated value, when we click specify, what we're going to be doing is using a get current time UTC milliseconds. Now, what we need to take into account is that this is actually a fractional value. It includes your date, your time, and the number of fractional seconds from the time that happened. So let's head back over to our data viewer and take a look. Here we have two different functions. When we double click and go into this, we've got two of them. Let me just put a return here so we can make this nice and clean, easy for us to read and see what's going on. So back in FileMaker 12, because this was released in FileMaker 13, the milliseconds. The milliseconds goes down to thousandths of a second. And what we can do is if we take this and we divide it by thousandths of a second, what we get is the exact same thing that we see when we wrap FileMaker's get as number around a timestamp. We also got this right around FileMaker 19. It was 19.6. And we can see that there we're wrapping to 1 plus the 6 zeros is how I think of it. I think of you've got 3 sets of zeros, and then when you go from milli, which is thousands, mil, to micro, you're just simply take, instead of having 3 zeros, you're going to have 3 additional zeros. That's how I break it down for myself and make it really easy to understand. Now, when we look at that, we can see that what it's doing is this number is the base internal number that FileMaker stores. This includes both the date and the time. Anything at the decimal point and later is your fractional value. Now, this becomes important because most of the systems that we are going to work with, in fact, one of the systems that I personally work with is DynamoDB in Amazon's AWS services. Things happen so fast that you get multiple transactions or things going on within 1 second. So where FileMaker started out and the get current timestamp worked way back in the day when we weren't doing things as fast. Well, we still were, but what was important was that we were able to manage it all within FileMaker. We did not have fractional seconds because our systems were pretty much isolated standalone silos, but now we're working with AWS, we're working with Google, we're working with other APIs, and a lot of the times that fractional value is actually necessary because you'll get hundreds and sometimes thousands and sometimes tens of thousands of things happening within the same second. Because of that, you need that fractional value. Now, whether you need milliseconds or a microsecond difference, really doesn't matter. But what we're going to do is, if we're developing a modern FileMaker system, we're just going to take advantage and we're going to include that fractional value of the microseconds, because we can always chop it off. So if we take a look at this number, we can see that the number is exactly the same, 6389968. Well, it wasn't because of my refresh. Let's refresh it. And we get a little bit of a difference there. Again, as number timestamp. That's because of the UTC. So the difference here is my time zone. And we can see that right here where we've got a time zone offset. So if I was at GMT, which is somewhere right around in the United Kingdom, I've actually been there on the line, 1 foot on one side, 1 foot on the other, of where time actually starts to shift. It's pretty cool. The core root number is something that you can pass into FileMaker's get as timestamp. I could take this 63899700927, pass that into a, do I have one in here? I don't, but the get as timestamp, I would be able to pass that in, and it would convert it into the date that I expect to see in FileMaker. The time zone offset is something that once we got the UTC milliseconds, we were able to actually find out what the time zone was. Prior to this function, the UTC milliseconds, we did not have universal coordinated time. We only had local time or the server time, and if there was a difference between those two. Now, my server clearly is at the same time zone as my local time. But here what we're going to do with the time zone offset, we'll take a look at that particular function because it's a very core thing to know. Time zone offset, we'll open that and we'll take a look. We can see that what we need to do is simply take a difference between the UTC time and whatever the local time is. And what that will do is it will create the positive or the negative from that line. And wherever you are in the rest of the world, it will actually present that with this function right here, which is really nice. And that's what you're going to need to use. You can always add or subtract whatever you need to with regards to the time, because time is always working based on whatever the lowest unit of measure is for that particular function. So let's take a quick look at that in terms of what I'm saying. When I say that we are going to look at the whatever the lowest time value is, if I say get function, let's get current time. Let's current time stamp. Let's get that right there. So if we see that right there, and we do a +1, what we're going to do is we are going to see that this is the 1, in this particular case, the lowest unit of value for the timestamp is seconds. Whereas the lowest unit of value for a date is 1 day. So if we scroll out here and I make this a little bit smaller, well, we're going to get it all on screen, and we're going to click this right here, and we're going to click evaluate. And we can see, there we go, it's increasing. Now I'm clicking this, you can see the evaluate flashing it. I'm clicking it more than there are, I'm clicking it at a fractional level. I'm clicking it more times in 1 second rather than just 1 second. But you can see that the seconds are only increasing by 1. Likewise, if we get this and we say get current date and we evaluate that, what we're going to see is that nothing is happening because we can't see the difference because we're only moving forward in fractional seconds or seconds. Whereas if we add this, which currently, if I add 0, you can see that the date is currently 11/25. And if I add 1, it goes to 11/26. If I add 2, it goes to 11/27, etc. So it's just simple addition. If you didn't already know that, in terms of how dates work, how you're going to either move them forward or backward. If it's a timestamp, you're only working with seconds. If it's a date, you're working with days. If it's time, you're working with seconds as well, such as the get current time. Get current time right there. Now, time does cycle. Time cycles on a 24-hour period. And if we evaluate this, we'll see that the seconds will increase as the seconds increase, no matter how quickly I click this. And we're going to use that knowledge in order to offset things based on what we want to display. So if you take my suggestion, and if we go back to our defined database and we look at our tables, if you never added the timestamps of the created on and modified, and you only ever added the UTC created on and modified, you're always able to get the user's time zone and then show them what their local time is, because you're simply just going to take this time zone and you're going to add it to whatever the time is that you're getting. So if I took the UTC milliseconds and I added a -5 hours, it would actually calculate that out and adjust it. So if you're showing that down at the bottom of your screen of when was this record created, who created it, when was it modified, and who was it modified by. Well, if you want to show that in local time, you can use this time zone offset. Or if you're lazy, like me, you can just simply include an extra field. Now, sometimes when we want the most optimized system possible, that display is really not that big of a cost when it comes up on screen. But over the life and over the scope of the database, every single field that you add within FileMaker can incrementally add to its performance degradation. And that's what we're interested in, is if you really don't need the current timestamp for your modified on and your created by, then just use the UTC milliseconds. Which brings us to this right here, timestamp UTC and timestamp UTC fractional. So these two functions are basically what I consider, out of the suite of functions that we have, when we look at all of these, you can see that this, and this, they all include a parameter that allows you to pass in the timestamp, whatever timestamp you're going to pass in. But this right here and this, they do not have parameters. These are what I consider the baseline core timestamp that you're going to use in all of your solution. Now, it is not a local time because, quite clearly, it is UTC time. That is what you're going to use. In a lot of other programming environments, there is a situation where what they have is this value called now. And whatever now is, it evaluates to UTC time, which is the time that you get right then. So if I put in timestamp, or if I just start to type UTC, which is convenient, I can go to UTC, and we'll turn that on right there. That is the UTC time with its fractional value, which I can always chop off. Now, you get to choose whether you want to include this or not, and we're going to take a look at the custom function. If I want, now this is what's comfortable to FileMaker and to us as humans when we look at this, but if I want to get the number value, then I'm just going to put in that UTC fractional, and all that's going to do is return the number version with the fractional included, which again, you can always chop off. There's multiple ways to do it. If I take a div and I put in a number right there and divide it by 1, I'm just going to get just that core part. So if I take that off, you can see that the fractional value will come right there. Now you'll see this in the custom functions that are included in this suite that I've added into the launcher file that we have here. But for the most part, everything that you're going to do or use when it comes to a timestamp is one of these two values, or that's what I do when I'm going to be developing. From that, then it totally depends on the systems that I'm working with. If I'm completely 100% within FileMaker, then those will satisfy me just fine. But out in the rest of the development world, there are many other formats. Well, I shouldn't say many. There are fundamentally a few, or a handful of them. And what they do is they either standardize a format or it's Unix. So FileMaker has its own date where it starts from, and I forget where one starts from. FileMaker is like 000. It's in the help documentation. I could open that up. I'm not going to take the time and open it right here, but you open FileMaker's get current time or its date or whatever. Within that documentation, it's going to tell you where it starts from. Unix is a different format where the rest of all of our Linux, Unix computer systems, they use a different starting point in the history of time to track time. And I believe it's 1970 for Unix time. Now, the Unix timestamp is used in a lot of other systems. Boy, name a content management system that doesn't use Unix time in terms of its base for where you start counting from. The Unix timestamp, and then this reversed and this ISO, these are all just different formats. This is a core. This is core to FileMaker. This is just a formatting. You can see that it's basically just taking this reverse notation of the date itself. Now, the great thing about all of these functions and this timestamp right here, where you can see that this is simply the format that most commonly is expected within JavaScript. Because JSON. Because JavaScript, which uses JSON, does not have a timestamp date designation within JSON, you have to pick some type of standard. And most of the time, this isn't across the board. It really depends on the developer and who developed the system. But predominantly, one of the most common and popular is this ISO 8601, which standardizes the time or a timestamp to a particular format. That format is obviously the reverse of the date, where you've got the year, the month, the day, a T, which designates your separator for the time, where you're going to have 24-hour time, where you're going to have hours, minutes, seconds, and then fractional seconds. And again, we've already seen that you can chop those off. Now, the timestamp reversed, when we look at that, that is simply just a formatting of time. In fact, if we go open that function, timestamp reversed, and we take a look at it, we can see that all we're doing is we are referencing the UTC time. Again, that's the core. What I consider the core in my FileMaker systems is I'm not going to use the local time for when I'm going to stamp things. I'm going to use a timestamp that all of the systems, whether I traverse a time zone or not, is going to use. All this is doing is it's padding on all of these values in order to make it the reverse format, and it's just putting year, month, and day. Now, of all of the ways that you can format data, you can create a multitude of FileMaker functions for formatting dates, times, and timestamps. But the one that I've seen that is the most convenient is one from Kyle Williams right here. I think I got this on the Brian Dunning website, and I've adapted it to fit what I would like to use, but credit where credit is due. I've used a lot of different systems to format dates in all of FileMaker systems. I've copied the PHP method. I've copied a bunch of different methods, but I like the hybrid that this comes up with in terms of its combination of using more. It's FileMaker-ish, but it also fits those other formats where it's very easy to format dates and times. So once we know that we're working with, underneath the hood, a number, that number can be converted to whatever type of display that we want. And we can see that right here, when we cancel our functions and we look at our format right here, we're getting Tuesday, November 25th, week 48. What I like about this is it's one single function that can get you any of the formats that you want. And we'll take a look at it. And what you're able to do is you're able to change these. If you need to localize this so that it works with a different language, you just go in and change the names within that custom function. Need it to be German, need it to be Spanish, whatever you need it to be. But what's really cool about this is you simply just type things in. So he's got day name here, but watch this when you go to like the uppercase version. I think, does he have uppercase? Doesn't have it on that one. We'll put in, I don't have my automatically evaluate on. Day, right there. So you can go see Tuesday. If I go day, then it's capitalized. If I go day name, it's just so easy that once you get used to the little phrases that it uses, you can pretty much put whatever you want. So that's week. That would be week without, if it was a single, within the first 10, it wouldn't have the preceding 0, etc. You need an uppercase, you can go uppercase right there. It's just so easy to simply use this formatter, pass in your timestamp, and then pass in the format that you want. In fact, a lot of the times in my systems, I will make yet another dedicated custom function where if I have a standardized format across the whole system, that one custom function will simply be this text string, where it's date, date long, date short, whatever it is that your system needs to use. Now, this is the calculated date, which is slightly different than what you get when you take a look at in FileMaker's layout mode, when you have a particular date field selected. I don't know if this will actually do it with this particular field. We can always just add a new value here. Let's insert a date symbol right there. So when this is selected, I should be able to go to this fourth area, scroll down to the bottom. We'll close this. Let's actually close all of them. The data formatting. So for this particular item, I can select this date right here. And I do have these options where I can go system short, long system, custom, or of course any of FileMaker's predetermined. But once I select that predetermined, it puts it in, and then I'm able to change any of the values that I want for date numbers, 0, etc. I can choose whatever I want to do. You've probably already done that. This formatting of a date is the layout formatting of a date, whereas using a custom function for the formatting of a date is an alternative for displaying the information. And if the date information, if you are formatting it, more than likely that's being returned the result as a string, as text. Whereas if FileMaker can see that it is a date, then you're able to use all of this layout formatting that you want. And I believe this will override. If not, I haven't tried it because usually I don't commingle the different formattings. So we've got a formatter, we've got Unix, we've got the three critical versions. We've got our FileMaker critical UTC, we've got timestamp in Unix format, and then we've got a timestamp in JSON's most common format. There may be other slight variations that you find out there in the tech world, but those are the core three that I'm interested in. Now, the cool thing about these functions, and what I suggest, is that you allow these functions to simply take nothing as a parameter, and what you get is now. You get that thing that I talked about, where in a lot of other programming languages you have this function called now, and it returns whatever the time is right now as UTC. So what you'll see is when you look at the functions, and you go to, say, for example, let's take the reversed right here, you can see that in the let function, I've defined the now. That is the timestamp of the UTC, and this simple if right here is what does the magic. So when you pass in, if you pass in an empty timestamp, it's going to use now. Otherwise, it's going to get what you passed in, and it's going to forcibly coerce it into a timestamp and then actually apply its formatting. So this sequence right here, if you're going to create a FileMaker custom function with a custom date formatter, date, time, timestamp, this is the format that I would suggest using. But if you need, in the whole of your solution, something just to display the formatting of time, it's infinitely easier just to use a dedicated formatting function that handles the multitude of options that you would want to use. That's why I consider this the core for anything that I'm going to add into a FileMaker solution. I select date time, I copy it, I paste it, I've got my core. Now in this, you're going to find some additional extras. This is a supporting function. These are both supporting functions. This is a validator. If you need to validate a particular value before you're going to pass it off, this is very common within JSON, where if you're going to include a ISO timestamp, if you want to validate that full timestamp, that it is a valid timestamp, first off, you want to make sure that this will only return a valid value if you call the function. But if you're getting a value from somewhere else, maybe it's coming from an import somewhere, and you want to validate that, you can create your own validation functions. And the only reason I'm bringing this to your attention is that within here, the way that you validate is you simply filter things down to their absolute minimum of what they should be, and you compare that to what you have. So you can see that what I'm doing is I've got a clean text where I am filtering whatever you pass in. So this date text can come in as anything. You can see all of these examples right here. You could pass in this value. You could pass in this value. You could pass in this right here where somebody's accidentally typed an extra 0. All of these are test cases, and you want to run them through your validator so that you are going to be able to 100% ensure that no matter what the user supplies, what comes out is what your whole environment or what your programming actually expects. So when we filter that, we get down and we have a number of things that we can do, but one of the coolest things that I like about this is, and this is a great example for understanding how to do script validation, function validation, data validation, whatever it is. You can basically use FileMaker's method to get something as a date if it comes in as a string and compare it to what you originally got. And that's essentially what this function is doing, is it's creating a date as a test date, and then it's comparing the two. You can see right here, if the converted date does not equal the test date, then FileMaker isn't able to resolve this as a date. And that's one of the best ways to actually validate things. If it's text. If it's text coming in and you're trying to convert that into time, then create some time with the values that it supplies, then compare the two, and you can do other validations as well. For example, in that particular case, it has to have at least 2 dashes. If it doesn't have 2 dashes, I think that's in here. You can see all of them right here. And this is what makes coding so wonderful, is when you're very explicit and clear, making self-documenting code, you can say, does it have the correct length overall? Does it have the correct digits? Does it have the correct number of dashes? And for each one of these, if it does not evaluate, we're returning a false. If everything passes, then finally at the end you get a true. And that's just a great way to create a validator. That's just one example that I include into this set, because you don't always need these validators unless the system that you're working with is getting the information from outside of FileMaker. If you're doing everything within FileMaker and you know that what you're passing around is valid, and you know that your functions are returning valid values, then you're really not as worried about it. But it is good to know that you can create a validator. Now, the last thing that we have in this are what I call convenience functions. This particular function, time from date, this is from, where is it? Right here. It's Gabriel. There we go. Gabriel Woodger. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Everything is inspiration. This he has taken from Moment. Now, Moment is a JavaScript library that is extremely popular for working with dates and times. It basically takes all of the core elements, very much like what this little collection does. FileMaker provides us with a core element of a date, a time, and a timestamp object, but it doesn't do any of the nice stuff for us. FileMaker does not provide a Unix time. FileMaker does not provide an ISO 8601 time, so we have to create that for ourselves, and we do it with a suite of custom functions, clearly. But this particular function of the time from date is a adaptation from Moment, where you can actually put in a starting time and an ending time. They don't have to be in the order where the future date is here and the starting date is here. You can actually have the future date here and a starting date here. It simply just takes 2 dates. And what it's going to do is calculate the difference in that, whether you're going back into the past or into the future, and it returns a human readable version of that. You can see that right here, where we've got this right here, time from date, it's saying 7 days ago. If I go into this and I simply just take this +7 off of this one and put the +7 over here, you are going to see that it goes from 7 days ago, and I click evaluate, and it goes in 7 days. So really all it is a date 1 and date 2. The parameter in those particular cases is not something that I would necessarily use where it's not, the parameter is that it doesn't always have to be a future date, is what I'm trying to say. So if we go into this and we go time from date, and I put this in and I see that it says future date, and I'm like, oh, I have to have a future date. No, You don't. It's basically date 1 and date 2, and it will calculate what you need based on those two. You can modify those parameters if you want to. But that, for the most part, is your date, time, timestamp fundamentals. That is what I am going to develop in my system. Is I'm not going to have typically those times anymore from FileMaker's convenience in the managed fields. I'm typically just putting the one that I put. All of this, remember, FileMaker was created at a time before all of our modern technology took over. And a lot of these convenience options of the creation, the modification, the serial number, value from last visited record, data, all of this is essentially replaced by this right there. Whatever it is that you need to start out with, that's pretty much where you're going to put it. You can almost ignore a lot of this because it really doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't factor in. In fact, serial number is a bad way to go unless a serial number is something that you want to show on an invoice that's just an incrementing number. But that's not the key value you're going to use. You're never going to use a serial number on a system, especially in today's API world, because you are using UUIDs all over the place. AWS, Google, you name the technology, Cloudflare, the big player, whoever it is, they are not using serial numbers. I promise you. They are, in many cases, using some type of unique ID, and a lot of them UUID version 4. So off of that rant, but this is what you need for dates and times. Now, granted, we are not needing a whole lot. This launcher is for us. It is for us to have the ability to launch a bunch of different FileMaker files. But I have put this in such that you are able to, this is inserted as a layout function, and you're able to go in and you're able to simply, from the custom functions, you're able to, from the file, simply copy this folder, go over and paste it in FileMaker 22. If you're in FileMaker 21 or earlier, you're going to be selecting that range of functions, copying all of them, because you can't copy the folder except in FileMaker 22 and higher. And here you're going to be able to play and see whatever you need to see and take this around to do whatever you need to do that is specific to your dates and times and get them into the format that you need. So hopefully this is going to help you out with not just this launcher and not just this solution, but basically all of the rest of your FileMaker solutions from here moving forward. Much luck, and until next time, happy FileMaking.
We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.